When you're stuck in a bit of an awkward spot with no bullets left in your primary weapon, typically the best thing to do is to whip out that sidearm, to take over and finish the fight. Whether that be to finish someone off you've already weakened a bit first, or to keep you going against other enemies that might be hanging around, causing you a bit of a problem. Despite not being the most important part of your loadout selection, secondary weapons are still vital to support your role in the game, and to complement your primary gun, mainly there when you need to rely on a bit of extra firepower. With there being so many different kinds of secondary weapons to pick from in the Battlefield games, whether it be a semi-automatic pistol, revolver, or something else a bit more out of the ordinary, there's always going to be the fan favourites that often tend to perform much better, and of course, the complete opposites, the sidearms that just don't really give you any reason to use them. Today it's those kind of handguns we're going to be taking a look at in this video, the ones that I'd consider to be some of the worst in this series. Remember that just because they've popped up in this video doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad weapons. It's just that I find them to be inferior, a bit pointless, or just generally less effective and less useful than most of the other options available to equip. So if your favourite handgun does happen to wind up on this list, try not to get too offended. It's all just opinions at the end of the day. So anyway, let's get on with it. Here's my top 10 worst sidearms in the Battlefield games. Now to start us off, we've got Battlefield 1's Modelo 1915, a support class semi-automatic pistol that fires pretty fast, but doesn't really pack much of a punch. Straight away, a lot of you guys are probably wondering why I've singled out the Modelo 1915, with it being very similar to a few of Battlefield 1's other faster firing pistols, like the 1903 Hammerless, Tashin pistol, and the fan favourite Frommerstop. All of these guns have almost identical stats, apart from a couple of minor things. So surely they should all be on a level playing field, having the same time to kill and recoil patterns. Well, if we line these pistols up side by side, they all generally support the same role in the game, being the fast shooting, low damage handgun for each of the 4 classes. But it's quite clear that the Modelo has the slight disadvantage, due to its reload times being slower than the rest. You could argue that the Frommerstop pistol holds one less round than the others, potentially making that gun the weakest of the bunch, but the Frommerstop more than makes up for this by having a much quicker deploy speed, an advantage that the Modelo doesn't offer. The fact that the Modelo doesn't have any kind of upper hand over the others, but generally seems to swap its mags over at a slower rate, kinda makes it the worst of those 4 guns. Not a particularly bad weapon, hence why it only makes 10th place, because it still gives support players an option to equip a fast firing, low damage sidearm, but still it's technically a slightly inferior variant to its counterparts, making it a less ideal choice to pick. Coming up next in 9th place is the QSC-92 from Battlefield 4, a semi-automatic pistol that doesn't really give you any reason to use it over the others, being fairly ineffective in a lot of gunfights. Just like Battlefield 1's Modelo 1915 that we've just talked about, the QSC-92 is another one of those rapid but puny pistols, though this one can seem really bloody weak, typically taking 5 bullets minimum to kill enemies up close. Now considering the other guy could be standing right next to you, that's a hell of a lot of bullets to put him down on the floor, even if the gun can potentially fire at 455 RPM, which is still miles slower than most automatic weapons in the game, putting you at a very big disadvantage in a lot of situations. I guess you could say that this gun is sorta like a slightly worse version of the FN57, being a very similar sort of weapon with a lot of the same kind of traits. Neither of them are statistically great sidearms, because that extra 55 RPM isn't really enough to make up for the extra shots needed to kill, also making their larger than average 20 round magazines less useful too, because the extra bullets you'll be gaining from those magazines you'll be losing, due to more shots being required to take your opponents out. But with the QSC-92 having more horizontal recoil, and the FN57 having the heavier vertical recoil, at least the FN57's upwards kick will seem a little bit less problematic overall, often being easier to counter by firing a bit slower against enemies further away. Whereas the QSC-92's recoil on the other hand will often fall shots off target, lengthening those already rubbish kill times even more, which really isn't a good thing at all. Now this next gun might raise a few eyebrows, being a revolver that sort of got its own little cult following of users, the Nagant M1895, a sidearm that some people seem to prefer, but most others like myself don't really see it as a worthy choice to use. You could argue that this is kinda like an all-kit Mars automatic, having the same damage model but with better recoil stats, which doesn't really sound too bad at all. But of course, being a gate-loaded revolver, the Nagant is plagued with some of the worst reload times of all the sidearms, only holding a maximum of 7 shots too. The gun doesn't fire particularly fast, and it'll typically take 3 shots to kill within shorter sight lines, unlike pretty much all of the other revolvers, only taking 2. Terrible reloads combined with weaker bullets and a fairly bog standard fire rate isn't really anything to get excited about, and in close quarter fights you'll almost always struggle to take down other players, and deal with the awkward situations you get thrown in. And if there's a couple of enemies on the screen at once, well, you can kiss your ass goodbye. The only time the Nagant Revolver really becomes a useful sidearm is when you need to finish off a player far away that's already quite low on health. Mainly because it deals a fairly decent damage over distance, and because it has a reasonably nippy bullet speed for a revolver. But that's pretty much it. It can be effective in the right situation, but the right situation very rarely comes by enough to make the Nagant Revolver a viable choice worth picking. Coming in at 7th place is the pretty funky looking bolt action Wellrod Pistol from Battlefield 5, which is basically like a crappier version of Battlefield 1's Obrez. Unlike the Obrez pistol, the Wellrod can't kill in one shot, unless you manage to hit the other guy in the head within shorter sight lines. Not always a very easy thing to do. It deals far less damage overall, typically taking 2 to 3 bullets to take down most of its targets. Though despite generally dealing more damage than the other sidearms, it can only shoot at a measly 42 RPM, a speed which is slower than all of the bolt action rifles, giving it some really cruddy kill times. Of course, you can't exactly compare this thing to a bolt action rifle, which at the end of the day is a fully fledged primary weapon. The Wellrod is a fine enough gun to finish people off up close, but then again so is almost anything else, without the jeopardy of missing shots, significantly increasing the gun's time to kill with it firing so slowly, just 1 shot at a time. The fact that the Wellrod has a pretty standard muzzle velocity of 250 meters per second still makes it a really tricky thing to use precisely over long range, once again limiting its effectiveness as a well-rounded sidearm, something the gun truly isn't, lightly screwing you over more times than helping you out. A certain saving grace could be its built-in suppressor, hiding directional hit markers, making it harder for enemies to find you and return the fire, an aspect that might come in handy when flanking. But in most circumstances, the Wellrod just doesn't give you enough reason to use it, often giving you more risk than reward. Moving over to Battlefield Hardline next with the 410 Jury, one of the most interested yet lackluster revolvers in the whole franchise. Unlike your typical bullet-flinging revolver, inside the Jury cylinders are a bunch of shells packed with buckshot, basically making it a shotgun disguised as a handgun. That might sound pretty cool, seeming like something that everyone would want to use, but in reality this gun is only really useful at point blank range, as those buckshot pellets are only going to tickle your opponents if they stray any further, making it an extremely situational and often fairly awkward thing to use, with it only holding 5 shells and taking quite a while to reload. Most of the shotguns aren't exactly brilliant weapons as they are in Battlefield Hardline, and with the 410 Jury essentially acting like an even weaker version, this doesn't exactly make it a very appealing thing to use. It can be a really inconsistent sidearm that usually takes multiple shots to kill, often meaning that you'll need to completely empty the cylinder to get the job done, and take down a lone target beyond point blank range. If another enemy comes walking around the corner while you're fumbling around loading those shells, then it's going to be lights out for you. So although the Jury does have potential in close quarters, because it has one of the shortest ranges in the game, the other sidearms are usually going to be a much safer bet, being far more reliable and appropriate for a much wider span of ranges, ultimately making them better options to equip for most gunfights. Halfway down the list now, at number 5, we've got the Mare's Leg from Battlefield 4, one of the few sidearms in the game which isn't actually a handgun, yet still seems like a bit of a pointless thing to use. Now I bet a lot of you guys aren't massively surprised to see this thing pop up on here. Although there's a few people out there that do enjoy the challenge of using a lever action rifle as a secondary weapon, the Mare's Leg just doesn't bring enough to the table to allow it to compete with a lot of the other choices on offer for general play. It's actually got a really similar damage model to Battlefield 5's Wellrod Pistol, dealing 56 maximum, 37.5 minimum, just having slightly more range. And in a sense, it kind of functions in a fairly similar way, being a very risky thing to use in close quarters, but a bit deadlier against players in the distance that need finishing off. With that said, it's still often going to require 3 shots to kill someone beyond 30 meters, which isn't really all that far. Plus it's going to struggle to deal with players up close too, due to it usually taking 2 bullets to drop them, and with it firing so slowly, due to that lever action mechanism. So whatever the situation, the Mare's Leg is often going to be a very undependable thing to have on your loadout, which kinda goes against the whole point of having a sidearm, being something there that you can rely on to help you out in awkward situations. Long story short, if you want a high-powered weapon with plenty of range, you're probably better off going for the 44 Magnum. It deals the same damage values, just with a slightly quicker damage drop-off, while firing a hell of a lot quicker, and reloading all 6 of its shots at a much faster rate too, generally making it the better option. Coming in at 4th place is the P08 from Battlefield 5, aka the Luger pistol, a gun that's not really worth using for a variety of different reasons. Once again, just like from my top 10 worst primary weapons video, this is another one of those guns that suffers from having a toggle lock mechanism, basically making the arse end of the pistol bounce up and down when it's fired off. This isn't a bad thing for quite a lot of the guns in the series, just like it wasn't a bad thing for the P08 pistol in Battlefield 1, because in that game, the toggle lock animation was done in a way where it didn't obstruct your view. The P08 carbine from Battlefield 5 doesn't block those iron sights either, but unfortunately, with the pistol, it does, making it really bloody difficult to stay on target and fire the gun off quickly, because you can't friggin' see where you're aiming. Of course, this is only a problem in ADS, so hip firing with the P08 is usually the best way to go, even if it's not always ideal. But even taking that toggle lock issue away from the pistol, it's still only a pretty bog standard weapon anyway, essentially acting like a worse version of the P38, a gun with less kick and a faster deploy speed. What does choosing the P08 instead give you in return? Well, a teeny tiny increase in muzzle velocity and a marginally quicker reload speed. But when I say marginally quicker, I literally mean less than half a second, which you probably wouldn't even notice anyway. Because the P38 exists, there's really no point picking the Luger pistol. The P38 generally has the superior stats, and it's going to feel much easier to aim with, without that bouncy toggle lock system getting in the way all the time. In our 3rd place spot is the dual VZ61 from Battlefield Hardline, one of the coolest sidearms you can use, but at the same time, one of the most ineffective. Picking this gives you access to 2 rapid-firing Scorpion machine pistols, which looks a lot more badass than it is. The dual VZ61 takes the spray and pray concept to a whole other level, because although you'll be blasting out loads of bullets in the blink of an eye at 1300 RPM, one of the fastest automatic fire rates in the whole of the Battlefield franchise, you're practically limited to hipfire, with some absolutely terrible spread stats, and you basically won't be able to aim very well at all, with most of those bullets peppering the general area ahead of you, not really going where you want them to go. You might have double the firepower, and you might be shooting at some insane speeds, but not only is your aim going to be all over the place, the bullets you're firing out don't really deal very much damage individually, so you'll actually need to land quite a few shots if you want to bring someone down as well. Good luck doing that. Most of the time, using this thing isn't going to end very well at all. Your opponent has to be either clinging on to dear life for the dual VZ61 to take them down beyond punching range, or they have to be standing right on top of you, and even then it's not always very consistent. I guess you could say that this is a fairly accurate reflection of real life, because dual-wielding machine guns might look snazzy on the big screen, but it'd be a bit of a daft idea to do in reality, or in this case, in Battlefield. I bet you were wondering when this little meme of a gun was going to pop up. In 2nd place, we've got Battlefield 1's Kolibri pistol. A fun weapon to use in the eyes of a troll, but a bloody awful thing to use for the average player. The Kolibri wasn't exactly designed to be a competitive pistol, mainly just there to wind up snipers and people sitting around using stationary weapons. If you land 4 shots on your enemy's noggin in close quarters, then they're going to meet their demise in a very embarrassing way, being taken down by the weakest pistol in the game, forcing them to go back to the spawn screen with the tail between their legs. Otherwise, those little pipsqueak bullets are only going to tickle your opponent, often only dealing between 1 to 5 damage per hit, which is barely ever going to be enough to kill. That insanely high headshot multiplier is the only thing that makes this gun even remotely usable. But even with that, the Kolibri still isn't something you can depend on, even in close quarters, where it technically has the potential to take someone out. It's never a fun weapon to be killed by, but that's due to it being an extremely situational gun that's only really reliable against people standing completely still at point blank range, not the most common enemy to find. I guess you could use it to follow up from a sniper shot due to it being so accurate, but you'd still practically need to land all of your bullets from a single mag, which can be a really tricky thing to do in the middle of a heated gunfight. Although it was made as a bit of a joke weapon, the fact that this gun technically requires up to 100 bullets to kill someone easily makes it one of the worst in the series nevertheless. A good thing to piss people off, but a bad thing to use otherwise. So here we have it guys, a pistol that's actually more rubbish than the Kolibri. My worst sidearm in the franchise is the Liberator from Battlefield 5. Literally the most annoying, useless pile of shite you'll ever see in a video game. This gun was designed to be another joke type weapon, in a similar style to the Kolibri, but I somehow managed to make it even more horrendous. The Liberator uses the 45 caliber round, giving it the same sort of damage output to the M1911. The big difference is, it can only hold one shot, forcing you to spend about 7 seconds faffing around trying to load your next bullet, after you fire said shot off. This means that not only is the gun incapable of killing anyone per reload, but even if you press the muzzle against the other guy's head at point blank range and pull the trigger, it's still not going to be enough to take them out. So basically, this gun can't kill anyone with full health. Full stop. You can still theoretically use it to finish people off who are severely wounded in a close range firefight, but it's still only going to kill them if the health just so happens to be below 34%, and only if they happen to be within about 7 meters. Not exactly a very common thing in Battlefield 5, with everyone running around using health packs. If you miss your shot, you're buggered, and if you land your shot, you're still probably going to be buggered. The Liberator is hands down the worst sidearm in the Battlefield series, and quite possibly one of the worst weapons overall in any video game ever made. So those are my worst sidearms in the Battlefield games, but make sure you get your voice heard and let me know what your choices are in the comment section. Do you agree with my list? Would you add some other things to it? Discuss all of that down below. But that's it for another one guys, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you in that next episode.